Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the About Bitcoin podcast. You will have noticed that the title of this episode is Bitcoin Doesn't Actually Exist. So let me explain why I say that. When person A sends Bitcoin to person B, even the word send, which you will see in your wallet, doesn't make sense. There are no Bitcoins, nothing gets sent. You certainly don't receive any Bitcoins on your computer, and even less so in real life. What actually happens is the ledger, the record of who owns what, is updated. So person A sends, the ledger is debited, let's say 1 Bitcoin, and person B receives, don't actually receive anything, but their record of ownership is updated by the 1 Bitcoin that was sent. So although there's no Bitcoin, there never was, what's important is that the ledger is updated. If you think about it, it would be similar to going in a shop, buying some groceries, handing over your debit card, and as it goes through, your account is debited and the grocer's account is credited with the same amount. It doesn't matter that there's no cash used in that transaction, and for that transaction, cash may not have even existed. All that's important is the ledger is updated, and that's what happens in both Bitcoin and in a debit card transaction. So now you know why I say Bitcoin doesn't exist. We can turn our focus to talking more about that ledger, because the Bitcoin ledger is pretty important and pretty interesting, I think. Let's start by considering the ledger at your bank. So you have an account. There's a ledger that says how much money you have in your account. And where does that ledger exist? Well, it exists on the infrastructure of the bank. Maybe it's in a few different servers. Of course, they have backups, etc., hopefully. And who can update that ledger? Who can change it? Who can debit your account for if you were make a late payment or something? It can be manipulated by pretty much anyone at the bank. Any teller can update your account. They can add to it. They can take away from it. They can even freeze your account if they want and say you're not having any money anymore. We decided that, or our government decided that we don't like your country anymore, so you're not having your money. And there's not a lot you could do about that. This is a centralized ledger because it's in one place and it's controlled by someone, an entity. Now let's look at the Bitcoin ledger. I think you will find it's more secure and more resilient than that of your bank. Why do I say this? Well, no single entity controls it. No single entity, no person, no company, nobody, no hacker, nobody can update it in an unauthorized way. Nobody gets to debit your account. Your funds can only be moved or spent by you. Nobody can debit a fee from your account, and nobody can freeze your account. You might be wondering, what happens if they switched off the computer that was holding the ledger, or they disconnected it from the internet? What then? Well, that's a fair question, and could certainly happen to your bank, but the Bitcoin ledger is what's known as a distributed ledger. It exists on multiple computers, and when I say multiple, I mean hundreds of thousands all over the world. It's in data centers, it's in offices, and it's in people's homes. You could switch off any one of them, or you could disconnect a whole country from the internet, and you still wouldn't impact the functionality of the Bitcoin network. If anyone was to try to make an unauthorized change to the ledger, maybe they debit some of your Bitcoin from your account and add it to their account. A hacker, maybe. Well, every other Bitcoin node, as they're called, in the world would reject that change. They simply wouldn't accept it. At any given time, there is only one device in the world that can make a change to the blockchain. And exactly who that person is, or should I say that device is something of a lottery. They call it mining, and we will talk about mining in a future episode. But for the purpose of this discussion about the ledger and who can update it, there are, again, hundreds of thousands of machines, computers, servers all over the world, vying for the privilege of updating the blockchain with the last 10 minutes transactions. These updates to the blockchain are made approximately every 10 minutes, and nobody knows who is going to be allowed to update the blockchain. It's actually quite random. However, the device that is awarded the privilege of updating the blockchain is also rewarded with bitcoins. So to summarize that, we have all these machines all over the world trying frantically to solve a puzzle, and whichever one solves the puzzle is given the privilege of updating the blockchain for the last 10 minutes with the latest transactions, and they are then rewarded for playing a part in securing the network. So if this sounds a bit complicated, my apologies for that, and try my best to break it down, but all we need to know is that the ledger is distributed all over the world, so no one instance, no one country, no one severed fiber optic cable into the Atlantic can take the network down, and also no one person can make a change to the ledger unless you are the chosen one. And there are, as I said, hundreds of thousands of miners all over the world frantically trying to solve the puzzle, so they get the opportunity to update the blockchain, and they are chosen. Well, they're chosen by whoever's first to solve the puzzle. So if you were a hacker, or if there was a hacker that really wanted to interfere with the last 10 minutes transactions, they could only really do that if they were the chosen one. And even then, they would only be able to impact the last 10 minutes transactions. Suffice to say, it just wouldn't happen. And this is probably why Bitcoin has been so secure and never hacked in the approximately 12 years it's been running. Now, you may have noticed the more nodes we have, that's the machines that have a copy of the blockchain, the more nodes we have, and also the more miners we have, that's the people who enter the lottery for the opportunity to update the blockchain. The more of each of those, the more secure and resilient the network gets. And you will be pleased to know the numbers have only ever kept increasing. Well, there was one time when China banned mining and the number of miners dropped for a while, but it soon picked back up, and the number of nodes and the number of miners has never been higher and only keeps increasing. So day by day, the Bitcoin network is getting more and more secure and resilient. So now we know we have this network, this very secure network, which is getting more secure and resilient by the day. Let's talk about the ledger itself. There are no names on the ledger. There are no account numbers as such. So your next question might be, how do I identify myself as the owner of any given balance? Well, the identifier on the blockchain is via a key. It's a cryptographic key, and it's part of a key pair, which means that for every balance on the Bitcoin blockchain, there is a key showing on the blockchain, and then there is a corresponding key somewhere. In order to spend some Bitcoin, to send some Bitcoin or give it to somebody else, you need to prove that you are the owner of that Bitcoin by showing proof of the corresponding private key. And when I say showing proof, it's all done automatically via your Bitcoin wallet. It's not something that you have to worry about, and you don't have to know how it works behind the scenes. All you might like to know is that your balance on the blockchain is accompanied by a seemingly random set of numbers, but it actually corresponds to your private key. And your private key is most often kept in your wallet. So whilst Bitcoin is by no means completely anonymous, if one were to just look at the blockchain, there are no names and there is no way to know who owns what. It's only by taking that data and matching it up with other data, you can then start to be identified. But looking just at the blockchain, there are no names, no personally identifiable information on the blockchain. You identify yourself at the time of spending by presenting the corresponding private key to what is seen next to the balance on the blockchain. And as I said, don't have to worry at all if it sounds a little bit complicated, because everything is completely taken care of by your Bitcoin wallet. There is plenty of interesting information to know about wallets, and we are planning to cover that in the next episode. The blockchain itself is publicly viewable. Anybody can look at the blockchain on the internet, and there are companies out there already that have started doing blockchain type forensics and analytics, and the transaction history that is transparent on the internet actually goes back to day one. So every single transaction that has ever happened on Bitcoin exists openly on the internet for anybody to see. Although, unless you know exactly what you're doing, it looks pretty boring. Just numbers next to numbers. But it does mean that if you really want to protect your privacy, there are certain do's and don'ts, which we will come to in a future episode. Something I should add around about now, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit, but since there are no names on the blockchain, and the only way that one identifies themselves as the owner of some Bitcoin is to have the necessary key, then you may have realized by now that whoever holds the keys has access to the coins. So for this reason, it's really important that the keys are protected. If anybody gets your keys, technically they can get your coins. Thankfully, there are some really clever ways in which wallets have been designed for key management. There are lots of ways that you can keep them secure, you can keep them backed up, and if you follow some really quite basic best practices, your Bitcoin would be secure forever. But we mustn't be complacent. We must follow the guidelines about how we manage our keys, and we must take security seriously. We will cover all of this in future episodes. So I guess I am about to wrap up this episode on why Bitcoin doesn't exist. I hope you found the discussion of the Bitcoin blockchain, the ledger, to be relatively interesting. I certainly do. If you have any questions or feedback, any questions about what I've covered today, or anything else you'd like covered, then I'd love to hear from you. My email address is mail@aboutbitcoinpodcast.com. Thanks again for joining me. I look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Bye for now.